Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew, and welcome back to Frames of Space. A lot of the time, when people hear about the concept of the fertility crisis, they immediately picture some kind of abstract, societal level problem. Maybe it has to do with pensions or labor shortages or long term economic growth and all of that. But my guest for today's episode, Lyman Stone, starts somewhere much simpler. His basic claim is basically that if you ask people how many kids they want, they usually tell you a number that's higher than what they end up having. So the crisis is not just that birth rates are low, it's that a growing number of people are missing a life that they wanted to have. And once that gap gets big enough, it starts to show up everywhere in economics and culture and the whole mood of a society, frankly. Lyman is a senior fellow and director of the Pronatalism Initiative at the Institute for Family Studies. Lyman's TLDR for this episode is pretty straightforward, which is that falling fertility is a problem and we should remove barriers and conditions that make it easier for people who want kids to actually have and raise them. And that does sound straightforward, but it also opens up some harder questions that don't have neat answers, like why are so many people having fewer children than they say that they wanted? Is it money? Is it housing? Or is it something deeper going on? Something about marriage and how the basic pairing off part of adulthood, like dating, for example, is that becoming harder to pull off than it used to be? And if that's true, what are the causes of it? Well, one potential cause might be the internet, for example, because one thread running throughout this conversation has to do with the forces reshaping how we talk with each other online, like performance, outrage, and just the incentive to be a little bit sharper than you'd ever be in person. And that brings me to where this conversation actually begins, which is not with a chart and not with a policy proposal about fertility, but with a very interesting discussion about Lyman's personality. Because Lyman has a reputation. If you've read him, you know that he can be pretty sharp and sometimes pretty combative in print. He calls writing a blood sport. And in the first 10 minutes, we end up testing that persona in real time. Why does the internet pull out a different version of us? Here's my conversation with Lyman Stone. Hope you enjoy. Lyman Stone, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and it is a pleasure to have you. Maybe you could start by introducing yourself to our listeners. Like, who are you and what are you known for? Like, what is your writing about, for example?
So I'm a demographer. I study population. My particular specialty is fertility. People having babies. Now on that, when I say fertility, people often think, oh, so you're like a fertility doctor. No, I count the babies. I don't medically assist their production. Um, but fertility rates are falling around the world, and so my particular area of expertise is in demand right now, because I mean, people are having fewer babies, and that um, doesn't. I know some people are excited about that, some people aren't. But so if you have any prior familiarity with me, it would probably be something fertility related.
Yeah. All right. So, what is the impression that people have of you based on the writing that you are known for? Oh.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. They probably think I'm very analytic, kind of belligerent, and care a lot about falling fertility. I'm a conservative, so that comes through in most of my writing as well. Yeah, I think that's probably the impression people get of me.
Yeah. Would you consider so like I would assume that you actually do care about fertility and the main cause of
I,
your writing.
I do, yes.
Yeah. Like you're not faking it when yeah.
No, no, no. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think falling fertility is a really is a big problem. Though I'm a little idiosyncratic on that. That a lot of people they look at falling fertility and they're like, oh, it's going to be like really hard to finance old age pensions and the dependency ratio and the economy and all this stuff. And like that's all true. And like I'm not saying that's not true, and that's something to keep an eye on, be concerned about. But um. And then some people, they're worried about low fertility because really they're worried about low fertility for like a specific group, like their religion or ethnicity or nation or whatever. And yeah, I get that too. Like I particularly care about the fertility of like Lutherans because that's my religion. I want there to be a lot of them. Um, so like I get that, but ultimately for me, my big concern with fertility is about human freedom and human flourishing in the sense that people people want to have more kids than they're having. And the main reason they're not having kids is not because, well, they just kind of decided they didn't actually want them that much. It's because they're just not getting married in the first place. They're not arriving at the point in life where kids are like an actionable possibility, where the kind of family life they wanted is an actionable possibility. So I see it as a kind of failure of human uh, capacity for free action. I'm not saying it's coercion. It's different things. It's not like somebody's putting a gun to people's head and saying, "Don't have babies." But that marriage is obviously a coordination problem. Coupling is a coordination problem. You've got to have somebody else who wants to have and raise kids with you. And I do want to emphasize have and raise. Most people don't just want to have babies; they want to raise babies. And that's just become difficult for people for a wide variety of reasons.
You know, if you don't mind me saying this, you don't strike me as a particularly belligerent person. Like you said that you think that your followers would describe you as belligerent. You just sound like a nerd with like a special area of interest.
My Twitter persona and some of my Substack writing is where where all the aggression comes out. No. The thing is, like, I honestly, I mean, I can be argumentative, but I also I cultivate a directness about what I really think in my writing because I think that writing can tend to be quite dry and boring and analytic. And so it's good to, and also writing tends to bring out the most circuitous version of many people it's like because no one's limiting how many paragraphs they can put there, they feel like they can not say what they really mean for as long as they want. And that's just not how I prefer to write. I prefer to use writing as the chance to put down what I really, really think. And then if I'm talking to someone now or in person or whatever, that's the chance to try and read the other person's emotions and manage what you're saying in response to how they might be feeling. I think human to human conversation is the right setting for that. Whereas writing is a blood sport.
Yeah. Okay. So like but you turn into like a bloodthirsty warrior when you're a keyboard warrior when you're
Yes,
on
yes,
Substack.
exactly, exactly. But yeah, and, I know there's people who are like, oh, that person's so brave online, but then in person they don't say those things. It's like, well, yeah, because saying those things in person would be really dickish. Like, but
I disagree.
you don't think so? Okay,
Yeah,
fair
this is
enough.
okay. This is where I might want to start an argument with you.
Okay,
I
okay,
think
fair enough.
I think it is more ethical for someone to insult someone to their face than it is to insult them online. Like
Yeah,
I'm sure, like you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work about social media and the way that it's corrosive,
yeah.
yada yada yada. I'm not going to go into it. I'm sure like tons of our audience already knows.
Sure.
But like let's imagine that you know how like social media has had an especially bad effect on like the mental health of teenagers where
Hmm.
like let's say that you're a teenage girl and you're dealing with like body image problems or you're getting roasted by your classmates. If you see that on social media, you might have all the negative facial reactions, like you might cry, you might feel
Hmm.
depressed, and like the fact that the other person does not see you have that reaction does not change the
Hmm.
fact that that reaction still happened. So
Hmm.
like it's possible that if you insult someone and then you feel like a dick about it because they feel sad or depressed, they would still feel sad or depressed if you said that to them online. You're just
Yeah.
shielded from the consequences of your actions.
No, I think there's a couple reasons it's different. One is if I walk up to you in person and I insult you, or not even insult you, because we're mostly not talking about like gratuitous insults. If I say something that, if you make an argument and I say, look, that's a dumb and wrong argument, and the only reason you could believe that is if you literally can't do math. Okay.
Yeah, but that sounds like an
Okay.
insult. Yeah.
So yeah. If I were to say that to you in person, you have no time to react. Okay, like right there. And also your reaction, other people are going to see right away. Okay, so like not only have I said something to you that might be hurtful, I've set you up for additional embarrassments and I've put you on the spot where like I'm not giving you any optionality about how you choose to engage with what I just said. Okay, so in some sense, I am constraining your freedom of choice in how you respond because like meat space just is immediately imminent upon you. Okay. Like that's just how the real world is. Whereas online, you can say this thing and like what you can choose to do is just like close your computer. Right. You can just be
Assuming
like,
that like you're an adult and you're not like
sure.
growing
Well,
up as
I
a
would
kid.
just generally say like, kid, we should just kick kids off social media to begin with. So like I'm like Jonathan Haidt. What, how do you say it? Haidt?
It's
Whatever.
pronounced height, but carry
Haidt.
on.
Yeah. Jonathan Haidt built on this. So I just want to kick all the kids off anyways. But regardless, that like, you can choose to just close the thing, or you can choose to take a pause and be like, okay, you know, is Lyman saying this because Lyman's a mean person who hates me, or is Lyman saying this because I'm missing something about how innumerate my argument actually is here? Um, so I think the digital media gives people space to react. And then secondly, in the real world, we are sort of non-consensually in each other's spaces to begin with, right? There is finite physical space. We tend to occupy it. Whereas online, like you literally don't have to ever read my Substack or my Twitter. Like you can block me. You literally never have to see anything I say. You can like it's an infinite space where you can create your own echo chamber however you want. So if you choose to read what I'm saying, like that's your call. Like you walked in and said, Lyman, please insult me. So I think that those two differences, that is that the person on the receiving end of a negative interaction has a very wide choice space on a response. And secondly, that truly you're not forced to engage with any of this. Now you could say, well, does that apply in like highly public media like the New York Times or the Washington or the Wall Street Journal or something? I would say no, those actually kind of become public spaces on some sense. Where like if you're writing for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or some other like paper of record, or some extremely widely read outlet that isn't like your private space, then I would say basically like public decency norms apply. But I think when we're talking about like a personally branded space, that basically it's my house, you're just in it. And if I want to like be a potty mouth in my own house, like I can.
I mean, I think obviously I brought you on to talk about fertility, but I do want
We're
to
way off topic here. We're way
I,
off topic.
I want to push you on this like one last time because I think it's important.
Yeah.
So the first thing is that there is a difference between what people should be allowed to do and what people should be encouraged to
Yes,
do.
yes.
Like you're right that people can just like block you and like block anyone that they like has strong objections to them and just create an echo chamber that tells people what they want to hear. But like that's not a good thing, and I don't think that's what we should be encouraging. We should be encouraging that like this is a two-way street where both parties need to actually do things that would be both more productive and or more palatable for the other person to hear. So I
Mhm.
think that there's a negative incentive on social media, like where we all have like different sides of ourselves. Like we have the part of our personality that wants to be nice to people, and we
Mhm.
have the part of our personality that wants to roast people or be aggressive or insulting. And like a
Yep.
lot of the time, that second part of ourselves, we often don't cultivate it. We often don't foster it
Mhm.
because we know that if we did, either we would face the consequences of our actions, or if we're not sociopaths, we would see the consequences of our actions with our own eyes when we see
Mhm.
the effect that we have on other people. I think that one negative effect on social media is that it gives people an outlet to act as aggressively as they might subconsciously want to act,
Yeah.
not
It
because it
rewards
is,
that part of it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, not because it's like a good thing to do, but because A, you can get more upvotes and likes that way, and B, once again, you get to be shielded from the reaction that the other
Hmm.
person has, where even like even if I were to like talk to someone in person, like theoretically I could give them a full minute to respond and like be silent the whole time, but during that time I would still see if I like accidentally made them depressed or uncomfortable in a way that you don't see online.
Hmm.
So that's all I'll say. Feel free to push back if you'd like.
No, I mean, no, I mean, they're fair points. The uh, And I think it's certainly from like a we could say like a virtue ethics perspective. Is Lyman feeding a vicious personality trait by saying what he really thinks on Substack? And my wife would say like kind of yeah. And she's not entirely wrong. Um, to the extent that I've actually been working hard at being nicer, particularly on Twitter recently, because more and more of my Twitter following is you see a very short snippet of someone, right? And I've realized that Substack is the place where I can really unleash the beast because you read whole articles.
Yeah,
So I'm trying to be nicer on Twitter where people, first of all, they're not always in on the bit. And second of all, it's shorter. But
yeah.
yeah, no, I mean it's a fair concern.
Yeah, it's like I read one of your recent articles, like you spent like 2,000 words roasting people and just being as hard on them as possible, but you caveated it where the first 100 words of the article are just, I want to preface that these are good people and I would be nice to them if I met them in person.
Yes, yes,
That was
absolutely.
that was so unique. I'm not even sure what to make of it. Uh, yeah. Uh, maybe this is time to actually explain what you're roasting people about because there's a very specific topic that you get heated about. Obviously, you know the whole adage of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So maybe talk about like there's a very specific topic that you talked about at the very beginning, fertility. But once again, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So tell us why you care and why we should care as a result.
So I think analytically, when we look at people's lives, the thing we probably care about most is that their lives are long, that their lives are healthy, and that their lives are happy. That's what I care about. When I look at a society, aside from any like particular moral values that we may have, whatever, I want to ask, is this a place where people live long, healthy, happy lives? Now, um, uh, when it comes to fertility, we know from a growing body of research that if you ask people how many kids do you want to have, and they say two or three or 47 or none or whatever, and then they get to their late 40s, whatever, and they hit that number. Okay, they had the number they wanted. They tend to be much happier. If they did not hit that number, if they undershoot it or overshoot it, they tend to be much less happy. And when I say much less happy, sometimes happiness comes across as very fuzzy. Um, the effect on like a standard scale of like subjective well-being, like where we ask like how frequently are you anxious, how frequently are you depressed, stuff like that, is similar to a major disabling event. That is, not having the number of kids you wanted has a similar effect on subjective well-being as like major disability, or other kinds of severe adverse life outcomes. So I care about this because I look at people who are not having the family lives they want, and I see um, psychological pain. In my view, and this is might be eccentric, but I think that psychological pain is actually the worst pain. That it's in some sense worse than physical pain. So I think it's unfortunate to live in a society where more and more people are not enjoying the kinds of psychological rewards that they are in some sense evolutionarily hardwired for. That is raising their children, seeing them grow up. And then, and I'll say for me personally, for my wife and I personally, I mean, I wasn't always like a professional pronatalist. Um, we got married. We kind of wanted to have kids. We were pretty young. We were in our mid 20s. And we started trying to have kids, and we instead had lots of miscarriages. We had lots of times where we were pregnant, we were so excited, and then we weren't, and we were very sad. And that's what opened my eyes to realize, gosh, if we're this young and we're having these problems, um, what's going on societally? What's happening with everybody else? What's going on? And then I was like, oh crap, look, I see what's happening. People aren't having kids. We're not the only ones approaching, further and further into adulthood without the kind of life that we thought we would be living.
So maybe like during that thought process, you were like, there must be tons and tons of other people. There must have been tons and tons of other married couples where they want to have children, but they can't have children for this reason or that reason. And
Sure.
maybe it gave you a desire to make sure that they can have the children that they would say that they would want to have.
Exactly, exactly. Helping young people get married because marriage is the first hurdle, and then or marriage or long-term stable partnership, as your flavor may be. Get married and then yes, have the children they want to have. I mean, the one of the most rewarding parts of my work is when I'm able to talk to a group or a community about pronatalism, which is the ideology that supports higher birth rates. Um, and I can sometimes, occasionally, I'm able to give like a little bit of advice about a way that a church or a town or something can support young people. Or I'm able to sometimes give advice about, how a married couple or parents can think about parenting or life planning or something. And occasionally, I get emails from people being like, "Hey, we heard what you said. We really listened to our church. Our church started a meal train for new moms or whatever." Or, I talked to my spouse and we decided that actually, you know what, we were ready. And then they like send me a picture of their kid, of their baby. And I'm like, yeah.
And then
And like,
like moments like those are when you realize like this was all unambiguously worth it.
yeah. And here's the thing. My actual job is not to persuade people to have kids. Okay. My actual job is to persuade policymakers, whether that's corporate policy or government policy or whatever, decision makers to alter structures to help people have kids. Okay. Lifestyle. I am not a lifestyle influencer. Okay. My job is not to go out there and show you how beautiful it is to raise kids. My kids, I love my kids. They're great. They're so wonderful. But like the messes, the screaming, the bad behavior, it's all there. I'm not going to say I'm a perfect parent. My wife is. I'm not. Um, but my job is not to personally persuade you to have kids. My job is to work with policymakers. But on those occasions where it does so happen that somehow I did persuade someone, this is a great feeling. I love it. There's like a whole human there. Maybe partly slightly because of like something I said. That's like such a high.
So you would identify yourself as a pronatalist. What is pronatalism?
Pronatalism, so literally it's just Latin for more births, means you want more births. Um, Obviously, none of us there's not like a baby factory where you like pull on a lever and you get more births. And there shouldn't be because like babies need families to be raised in. But basically, what it means is you think falling fertility is a bad thing and that the solution to it is not just to adapt like with more technology or something like that, but to try and get more births. You may have caveats on that, maybe, but basically, you think more births is part of the solution. And I would say, as a corollary, that belief is not just an abstraction, that you think there's something that society should do or that people should do, that some actor should do to achieve more births. And I would say that the something that someone should do should not just be that, like, a lot of beautiful women join your harem. Like it should be like something that helps people other than you have more children.
What do you think that those goals should be? Should we be like encouraging more cultural norms in society, or do you think we should be passing more government policies in society that increase birth rates?
Yeah, so I have a model I kind of refer to it as like the crowbar model. Okay, so um, we do need to be passing government policies that support family formation, marriage and family formation more. Okay. We just do. Parents are shouldering a heavy burden for future society. And yes, having kids is great. And like I said, it can be a major source of satisfaction and contentment in life for the people who have them. But at the end of the day, society really does just owe parents for the work that they do. And I want to be clear, I believed that before I was a parent. Um, we do owe our parents, and we owe the parents of other children because they are doing a lot of work creating the people who will pay for the future and carry the future. And so society should compensate that, and we should support parents more through financial incentives, through better work arrangements for parents, through all this stuff. Now, secondarily, a lot of the policies that would help boost birth rates are also just good policies, like less restrictive land use rules, less restrictive occupational licensing rules, um, better family leave policies. Like these are also just like good policies we should probably do anyways. So that's one thing we should do. But the thing is like nobody has a baby. There's nobody out there who's like, well, I wasn't going to have a baby, but now the baby bonus went up by $250. So, honey, you want to be on the hook for 18 years of raising a child now? Like, that's not a thing that happens. Like, nobody does that. Okay. So, what are we really trying to do with policy? Well, policy can't and policy shouldn't supply the reasons to have children. The reasons to have children are because you love or you're going to love your kids. Or there's all kinds of other things. You want to carry on your family lineage. You want to see what kind of person you and your partner would make. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons people give for why they want to have kids. I could go on and on about that. But the point is, people have their own reasons. Policy's goal is not to give them reasons. Rather, it's to remove barriers. And in particular, it is to give leverage to cultural actors who are the real suppliers of the reasons to have kids. So the real person who gives you a reason to have your kids is a spouse, okay? Who says, I think we're ready. I think we're ready. And then you go, oh, I don't know. Maybe we wait another year. And they say, look, we could wait another year. But honey, like, you know, buying a house is more affordable than it used to be because like they're building all these new houses because they liberalized zoning honey, I know we could wait, but like they did just increase the child tax credit. Like we have a little more help coming. Like I think we could make it work. Or your mother-in-law is a cultural actor who might motivate you to have kids. She says, you can have kids. Well, look, I'll do it. Okay. I wasn't going to watch the kids before, but now I will because guess what? The government implemented a program where instead of paying a childcare center all that money, you can pay like a small amount of money to me and it's totally tax deductible for you. Like this is great for all of us. I'll watch your kid 3 days a week. Okay. Or a church where the religious leader says, look, we would love to be able to support families in our congregation who are having kids. And isn't it great that the government just put in place like a voucher program for education so you can send your kid to our church school for free? Like, that's great. Isn't that wonderful? The ultimate function of government policy is not to motivate people to have kids. It's to empower the cultural actors who give people reasons to have kids so that the people who want to have kids do. We're not trying to persuade people who don't want kids that kids are so much fun. I'm not out here like cheerleading unwanted pregnancy. Rather, we're trying to remove the obstacles for people who do want kids, and we're trying to empower the cultural actors that give people logics and reasons to have kids.
Yeah, maybe there are two data points where it would be important to talk to the audience about them, where there's like desired fertility levels and then there are actual fertility levels.
Yeah.
Like there's this sort of thing where like you talk to like you do surveys where you ask people how many kids would you want? And in general, the answers they would give about the number of kids they would want is generally larger than the number of kids they end up actually having. If we lived in an ideal world where people always had the amount of kids that they said that they would want in surveys, do you think that fertility would be above replacement level and we would not have to worry about declining fertility rates?
Yes, I know that in fact, because we have surveys where we ask people their desired fertility rate and they tell us. And it varies country by country. I think in Canada right now, it's just over 2. It's not quite replacement rate, but it's very close. Um, I'm working on a paper right now. We just surveyed this in Canada in 2025 for a group that I work with, and we're going to publish the paper soon, I think. It's just a little over 2. In the US, it's like 2.2, 2.1, something like that. In the UK, it's like 2.1. But around the world, it's typically above replacement, though not everywhere. Like Malta is low, China is low. So if people had everything they wanted to have, the whole declining fertility thing, I think would not be a serious issue. I mean, yeah, there'd be some countries that are declining, there'd be some countries that are growing, but it'd be very, very moderate decline. But also, it wouldn't be an issue in a whole other way. if people are having the number of kids that they want, I think governments really shouldn't be bullying them to have different numbers. Okay, like if you're a government and your people only want to have 1.4 kids each on average, the argument for trying to make them have two is kind of weird.
Oh, is
Like,
this like
oh,
what the Chinese government is trying to do because of
in
the
some
what?
sense, yeah. I mean, desired fertility in China is like one in surveys, post one child surveys where people could say whatever number they want. And it's not like a legal thing. Is still like 1.6 or something. And yes, real fertility is like one. So they do have upside potential, but um trying to make people have three kids who don't want three kids, I don't think the government should be doing that. Just like point blank, because again, I'm actually committed. I really am actually committed to this idea that um, that the main problem of falling fertility is that people are not getting what they want. That really is the main problem. Um, if people want to have small families and they just want their society to decline, so be it. That's that's their prerogative.
Oh, so like you would be fine. So like if the desired fertility level was like genuinely below two, like around the world, you would be fine with falling fertility rates as long as it reflected people's desires.
I would say what I would say is in that case, there's not a strong argument for the government to be doing a, additional pronatal policy as such. Now, I would then ask, why don't people want more kids? What's going on there? And then maybe we'd find that maybe there's some deeper societal problem that the government should address. And it's why people don't want kids. Maybe they just think society's awful and they hate the world. And we want to make the world less hateful. Okay. But I would say that when fertility is at or above the numbers that people say they want to have, it does radically alter the kinds of policies you can justify. And I think when fertility is at or above the numbers that people want, the argument for pronatalism is much weaker. And I will say I have declined to work with a government that wanted to raise fertility above what people in their country said they wanted, and I declined to uh, provide professional support for their efforts.
Oh, do you feel like that type of like government like policy or whatnot that would be too coercive?
It could be, yeah. And I mean, I think coercion is a huge problem, whether it's pronatal or antinatal coercion. People often talk about the case of Romania, where there was this really interventionist pronatal policy called Decree 770 under the communist government. It included really draconian stuff like monthly like cervical exams for women to see if they were pregnant or not. It's really uh, not great, quite bad stuff. And so we don't want that. Now, whenever you mention Romania, it is important to keep in mind that in terms of like who stacked bodies higher, pronatalists or antinatalists, um, every country in the world has had some period where they were forcibly sterilizing people without their consent because they needed to control population. Okay, everybody's done that. Every country did it. Some countries are still doing it. Um, in terms of the body count, antinatalists have really racked up a vastly more horrific toll than pronatalists. Nonetheless, the one case of coercive pronatalism with Romania gets trotted out every time this conversation comes up. Like, oh, we got to worry about coercive pronatalism. I'm like, are you serious? It happened. It was one time, and it was terrible, and we all agree it was terrible.
Is that like when you do all the like the insulting and arguing that you do with people online, is it because they think that you want to engage in like coercive policies?
No, I don't think very many people think that I want to engage in coercion. I think I'm pretty clear about that, and I'm pretty publicly, credibly committed to um, pronatalism in a way that's consistent with people's values. In fact, a lot of the people who disagree with me, who I get into the most heated arguments with, are people who think that we should not focus on desired fertility. Like I know the article you were referencing before. I was arguing with like Patrick Brown and Ivana Greco, and they're all people who, to be clear, I think they're all delightful, lovely people. I've no personal thing against them. I just think they're totally wrong, right? Because all three of them, on some level, think that desired fertility is a bad benchmark for pronatalism, that really we should just be supporting families, having more kids writ large. We don't need to call it pronatalism at all, just call it supporting families. And if desired fertility declined, then we would still want to hit replacement rate. We would still want to, have these big families because big families are just intrinsically good. Um, and so it's a funny case where oddly enough, the most pronatalist person in the argument is also the one arguing that we shouldn't just do like broad spectrum, no holds barred pronatalism. Okay, I would say no, there's limits. And the limit is you shouldn't make people have kids they don't want. But the other side tends to say, well, but desired fertility might be a bad benchmark.
Maybe that's a difference between the motivations that you have for being a pronatalist and the motivations that other people might have for
Mhm.
either being a pronatalist or whatever
Yeah,
they might refer to themselves as, where
yeah,
they might say like we need to raise like fertility rates because like declining fertility rates, it's like a climate change level problem and we need to
mhm.
do this to save the economy or whatever. And
To
you would
save
do
civilization.
to
Yeah.
save civilization. And for you, that's not the main goal. The main goal is just to allow people to achieve what they want that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to achieve on an individual level.
That's exactly what's going on. This is an argument that I've made in a couple places that fundamentally, people get in a place where they find themselves sort of poo-pooing the actual family desires of individual families because they came to pronatalism by an instrumental concern, right? Their first concern was, you know, the health of families, meaning, some kind of specific axiomatic idea about what families should be, or the fate of the economy, or transfer systems, or the number of soldiers available for conscription to fight North Korea, or whatever,
Or even
right?
like Social Security. Yeah.
Yeah, Social Security, exactly. Yeah. So when your entree on this issue is basically low fertility is a problem because of this instrumental outcome it has, then you also tend to be like, desired fertility. Well, you know, fertility needs to be XYZ for Social Security or for military recruitment or for your model of a good family life to dominate or whatever. Whereas I'm coming at it quite literally from just matter of first principles is that in most cases, unless there is some other pressing concern, people should and ought to have reproductive autonomy. They should have control of their own bodies and their own well-being and their own health. And provided that exercising that control is not jeopardizing the lives or essential interests of anyone else, um, we should expect that kind of autonomy to persist. Um, and if we see that people are failing to achieve their goals, that is, they are not effectively experiencing that autonomy, that is axiomatically a bad thing.
Yeah. Okay, maybe one last like piece of pushback before we move on to the next thing. What would you say, like, have there been arguments that where people say the reason why people say they want a larger amount of kids in surveys is because they're engaging in preference falsification, where they're saying something
Mhm.
that they don't actually believe. It could
Yeah.
be because they're trying to fit into society. It could be because they're socialized by like the patriarchy or whatnot. What would you say to the argument that they are engaging in some degree of preference falsification when they say they want a higher amount of kids than they actually end up having?
Oh, there's a lot of that. But on both sides, interestingly, there's also a lot of people who say they want zero kids who, as soon as they hold a baby, suddenly discover they wanted four. Um, uh, in practice, what we can see is um, a given cohort's average fertility preference, the average number of kids they want, tends to slightly rise as they get older, on average. The best predictor of increasing the number of kids you say you want is having a kid. That is, having kids tends to make you like them more. Okay. Most people, when they have a kid, they don't go, oh crap, that was so much worse than I thought. They go, oh, I want more of these now.
Like this,
Um,
this is more rewarding than I thought it would be.
yeah, this is better than I thought it would be. Um, we also know if you survey people when they're young, like before they have kids, like in their late teens, early 20s, and ask them how many kids they want to have and follow up with them for decades and longitudinally. And we have surveys that have done this. Okay. This is not speculative. That the number they give when they're young really does predict outcomes. Not perfectly. I'm not going to say it's perfect. Okay. And people on average undershoot, but like the people who said they want zero really do have a lot fewer kids than the people who said they wanted one. The people who said they wanted one really do have a lot fewer kids than the people who said they wanted two, and so on and so forth.
Like R squared is large enough for there to be a correlation.
Oh, it's a very high one. Yeah, it's ludicrously high. And there's no other variable that does better. Like if I look at your religion when you're young, it's way less predictive than your fertility preference. If I look at your sibling counts, how many siblings you have, it's way less predictive than your fertility preference. Um, your fertility preference is pretty much actually it's actually basically the only thing that predicts from early life. If I have fertility preference in the model, the effect of religiosity falls to almost zero. If I have fertility preference in the model, the effect of sibling count falls to almost zero. Now, other stuff over your life course still matters. Like if you like when you get married still matters. But like in terms of those early life variables, your your fertility preference early in life is way more predictive than anything else. So yeah, it's ludicrously predictive. It feels unfair actually. Like if you drop fertility preferences into a model of fertility behavior, it just blows up all the other variables, and it feels like cheating. But it turns out it's because actually the main reason people have kids is because they want them.
All right, so like basically there is a very strong correlation between fertility preferences and the actual amount of kids that they
Yeah,
have.
yeah,
So that A, that's true, and B, in general, people have fewer kids than they say that they want to in surveys earlier in their life.
yeah.
Maybe let's talk about the causes of that. What are some of the main reasons why people have fewer children than they might say that they want to?
The big one's marriage. So if we look at actually a great way to think about this is in like a longitudinal survey. If I look at the number of kids that you said you wanted, and then I look at the number you actually had, 30 years later, and then I just compare like the age at which you got married. Like how many years were you living with a married spouse? Okay. That like age exposure variable ends up predicting the gap between your desires and your outcomes. Okay. So if you said you wanted four and you got married at 21, okay, then the gap between your desires and your outcomes is probably really small. You probably actually had four. But if you said you wanted four and you didn't get married until you were 39, the gap is probably really big. Likewise, if you said you wanted one and you got married younger, you're more likely to hit one. Now you're also a bit more likely to overshoot. But the overshooting is mostly because you revise your preference upwards as you have kids. So in general, marriage is the biggest mediating factor. But then that's sort of, again, this is kind of cheating. Because like, okay, so marriage is the biggest mediating factor. So why don't people get married younger? And also like people know this, like they know if they got married younger, it'd be easier to have four kids or three kids or two kids or whatever. This isn't like a mystery to people. So why don't people who really want more kids marry younger? And the answer is they do. Desiring more children, is it, or if you report desiring more children when you're young, you do on average get married younger. Okay. So like people do actually pursue marriage more aggressively and get married younger because they wanted more kids. That's a real thing that happens. Um, but the other thing going on is just marriage isn't only up to you. It's up to the other person too. It's up to someone else too. And it's getting harder and harder for young people to find mates for many reasons. We could talk about social media. We could talk about online dating. We could talk about the decline of in-person socializing. We could talk about shifting gender polarization of political and social attitudes and values. We could talk about the changing economic balance of the sexes. Like there's a million different things going on with delayed marriage, but it is the single biggest factor.
That's interesting. Like in the past, when I've talked to people about declining fertility rates, they would say, "Oh, the main causes are that people are becoming more educated, or people are like gaining more equality, or that like it's because of like opportunity costs within first world countries, and as a result, maybe it's not the sort of thing that we can actually try to
Yeah.
tangibly solve without actually curtailing freedoms or stuff."
So it's
You have something to
definite.
say, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not education. We can rule that out conclusively. And the reason we can is for several reasons. One, we have some of these studies where they do like a regression discontinuity type of model where when education is expanded. So like when like another year is added to education. And it's very mixed effects on fertility. That is, it doesn't reliably seem to actually reduce fertility to keep people in school necessarily a year longer. Some do, some don't. So I'm not saying there's nothing there on that, but it's a very mixed effect. But more importantly, today in high income countries, education doesn't predict fertility. More educated people have about the same number of kids as less. In fact, in some countries, like in the Nordic countries now, the better educated people actually have more kids than the less educated people. So,
Oh, is it
the,
is it because the better educated people are more likely to get married?
yes, exactly. Exactly. So this is the dynamic, right? That the only reason there was this whole like, oh, dysgenic fertility, the poor people are having more kids. It's really just because the change in values and attitudes around sex and marriage that began in the Western world over the last century, really the last 70 years, 80 years, uh, it just sort of arrived for high status people first, and it took longer to hit low status people, low socioeconomic status people. Okay. That's it. That's the whole story. It's not that there was something intrinsic to education or to high socioeconomic status that was reducing fertility. It was purely just, it took time for these novel norms to diffuse downwards to lower socioeconomic status people. Um, the actual causal element here, it is true that extended education tends to delay marriage. Okay. So, not always, but generally. And so extended education can delay marriage, but it doesn't always delay marriage. Some highly educated groups still get married quite young. For example, Mormons, or Orthodox but non-Haredi Jews, tend to get very educated, but also marry rather young. Um, or you can think about, cases where, well, no, okay, so setting that aside, education, not it. We could talk about like income levels, opportunity cost. It's not that either. Actually, I was just reviewing a really nice paper earlier today that uses really nice a causal case of a country that had a sudden non-natural resource related shock to income, and it boosted fertility. But we can see this with natural resource income too, like oil booms, coal booms, they tend to boost fertility. Lottery winnings tend to moderately boost fertility. Um, so it isn't the case that higher income and wealth reduces fertility. This just isn't true. It's purely the fact that declining marriage and to some extent some contraceptive uptake and then some broader social value changes around family size was highly correlated with higher income and education that has totally just brain zapped lots of thinkers on this issue, lots of otherwise smart people. They see the GDP to TFR graph and they can never unsee it. And it like lives rent free in their brain forever. And it doesn't matter how many times, how conclusively you show them two-way fixed effect panel models that show that this is spurious correlation, or natural experiments that show that this is spurious correlation, or literal randomized controlled trials, like randomized assignments
Like
that
even if you were to yell, "This is not causal" to them every single day, it would not get rid of the effect.
no, people, they've seen the graph. They can never not see the graph. I mean, the graph of GDP per capita versus TFR is like, it is a huge info hazard. It just obliterates people's thinking on the topic.
Basically, what you're saying is that part, like the main reason why people don't have kids to the extent that they might say that they want to, is because people are getting married both at lower rates and they're getting married at later ages. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I will say there has been some decline over the last 60 years of desired family size as well. Okay. And that decline is more plausibly related to socioeconomic improvements. Okay. Particularly changes in child mortality. Okay. As fewer kids die, you don't need to have as many of them. And some economic things and education. So the decline in desired family size could be related to those broader macroeconomic factors. But that is not explaining the massive decline in fertility in the last 15, 20 years. In the last 15 or 20 years, we've seen a huge decline in fertility all around the world, even though desired family size is not declining very much. So the gap has just exploded, and that is not explained
Yeah.
by
Yeah, and this is the part where other people would say that gap is because of opportunity costs, and you're saying no, it's because like the decline of marriage rates, the decline of dating
yeah,
rates, the
yeah.
yeah.
Opportunity costs did not rise by 40% in the last 15 years compared to what they were before. They just didn't. That's not true.
Yeah, maybe this is the part. This is probably a bad faith characterization, but a lot of maybe like a lot of the people on the left who are critical of you, they would assume that you want to coerce people into getting married at lower rates, or at least no, not lower rates, lower
Yeah,
ages.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, so this is the wrinkle, right? People say, well, okay, you want people to get married more. Okay, that's not an in principle bad thing to want. But how are you going to do it? Are you just going to like tell women to settle with bad men? And I would say ideally, no. That's not what we would do. First of all, I think we can improve young men and young women. Like I think we can just make them better than they are right now. No offense to young men and young women, but I think we can level them up um, through various economic policies that improve the pace at which they achieve sort of full economic independence, both men and women. Um, Through cultural interventions that help them get back to socializing with each other in the real world.
Yeah. Oh, and like
Um,
having great, like lower levels of gender polarization and increased social
exactly,
trust between different
exactly.
genders. Yeah.
Yes, like my goal is not that we will bully, liberal women into settling for, based and red-pilled men. Okay, like that's my goal is that we will find ways to help young men and young women learn to love each other and get along with each other and respect each other and ideally not be quite so extremely different from each other. And obviously I'm not hiding the fact that I'm a conservative. So like, you know, what do I, in my ideal world, does pol is pol is depol would depolarization be symmetric? Well, no, I mean, on some personal level, I'd love to see depolarization occur disproportionately by more liberal people drifting a little more right. But I would be happy with some right people drifting a little left too, because there's some real insanity on the right now that is just bonkers.
Do you think people on the left affiliate you with the insanity that's happening on the right?
Probably sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah. What do you
And
do
look,
about that?
look, I'm a conservative. Um, it just is the case that you get splatter damage sometimes, and crying about the fact that that someone on the other side of the political spectrum uh, didn't like you because they misinterpreted you as being in favor of some insane thing that you're not. I mean, correcting that, it's good to correct that. And I do correct it when people say, oh, you're just one of the conservatives who blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, actually, there's quite a few areas where I'm definitely left of mainstream conservative parties. But so, correcting it is fine. It's fine to correct the record, but at the end of the day, like, yeah, you're going to catch splatter damage from other people in your political movement, and that just is what it is. And this is actually one of my complaints with like the whole pronatalism discourse is like people will be like, well, I don't want to be associated with Elon Musk. He says he's a pronatalist, and I don't like it. And I'm like, look, I'm not in the Elon fan club either. I've very publicly and very critically written about a lot of Elon's family behaviors and choices. Um, uh, I don't get any money from Elon. Okay, he's not a donor to the Institute for Family Studies. Um, so like, I'm not out there to convince people that they should revise their opinion of Elon Musk one way or another. But at the end of the day, like, yeah, get sometimes you just get spillovers from other people that also want some of the same things that you do. And I want some of the same things that Elon wants. Not all of the same things, but some of them. And that just is what it is. It's like saying, oh, I won't vote for a candidate that I like because a bad person might vote for the candidate that I like. Well, yeah, there's like only so many candidates and there's millions of voters. So some bad people are going to vote for the candidate you like. That's going to happen. So what?
You know, you're very clear about how like people often lump you in with those people and you often try to correct them. So maybe this is instance number 547 of you being able to correct them. Maybe you can take this time right now to set the record straight. You want to raise marriage rates and you want people to I'm assuming you want people to get married at lower ages. What specific both government policies and or cultural
Mhm.
norms would you support and or not support in
Yeah.
order to get to that?
Well, unfortunately, recently there's been some discourse on Twitter about like, we need to make teen pregnancy great again. And that's bonkers. That's nuts. I do not want people going out and having kids when they're 15. I think, like I'd love to see the average marriage age fall from like right now it's in the US or Canada or something. It's like somewhere between like 29 and 32. I'd love to see that get down to like 26, 27, 25. Okay, like mid 20s where it was in like 2007 or something. Okay. We're not talking about like rolling back the clock to 1825. We're talking about getting back to the sex people were having in 2007. Okay. It was fine. People had fun. Um, uh, so I'd like to see that. Now, how do you get there? Well, you don't get there by like, providing universal basic girlfriends for sad guys. Okay. The first thing you do is when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Okay. We have marriage penalties in tons of means tested programs, places where if you, particularly for parents, actually, interestingly enough, like if you are a single mom and you are getting nutritional assistance like food stamps or something, um, you often will lose those benefits if you marry the man who fathered your child. Okay, you literally lose the benefits because you have a man in the house now. You don't need the government. A man will take care of you. That is the historic justification for these marriage penalties. Nowadays, we say other things. We say, oh, it's because of additional need of vulnerable populations. It's like, why did she stop being a vulnerable population when she got married? Because a man will take care of her. It's this very like sexist patriarchal assumption that we build into our law on the assumption that women need a man to take care of them. And so we create marriage penalties. We create punishments for people to get married because once you have a man in your life, you don't need the government to help you. Whereas what I would say is you shouldn't punish people for getting married. Like, rule of thumb, when you get married, you shouldn't lose benefits unless your spouse is, I guess, like super high income. Like, okay, we can set some like very high threshold, maybe. Um, but fundamentally, you shouldn't lose family benefits when you get married. So that's the first place to start is just stop punishing people. And the people who get punished by this the most, by the way, are the working poor. People who they have a modest income, so they get a lot of means tested benefits. And then maybe they would marry someone else who is on a modest income and gets a lot of benefits. But the two of them together, their combined incomes, like price them out of getting any of these benefits. They're the people who are hardest hit. And I am very sympathetic to these people, to working class families who are trying to get ahead in life, who are trying to start a family, who are doing the things policymakers say they should, right? They're working. Even if it's not a glamorous job, even if it's not a great job, they're trying to get ahead, but we just throw roadblocks in their way time and time again. And I think it's awful and wrong. And we have a holiday coming up in 4 days, Valentine's Day, that is a celebration. I don't know when this is going to release, so that might be an outdated reference, but it is a celebration of Saint Valentine, who helped. The whole story around Saint Valentine is that he helped Roman soldiers avoid marriage penalties. Okay, he helped them skirt the law around marriage penalties. And I think that's awesome. Valentine's Day is a wonderful day to find a way to avoid marriage penalties, perhaps by getting married in a church, not telling the government, and claiming your single benefits even though you're married. I fully support that activity. Um, so that's one thing we can do. Other things we can do, we need to fix housing. We need housing to be more affordable because housing is a major way that people signal marital eligibility. And a big thing that motivates people to get married is when they can buy a house together. So we got to make housing more affordable. I don't know if those two things, fixing marriage penalty and met penalties and solving the housing crisis, I don't know if those make me a right-wing radical. I think they make me sane. But I think they're extremely important. And there's no point even talking about pronatalism with people who can't at least get on board with those two, because if we're not doing those, what are we even doing?
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of how about a month ago, I actually interviewed someone where the whole thing was just about the housing crisis and how he supports a land value tax to reduce the cost of rent. And then there was a point where he thought he made a reference that I thought was kind of shoehorned in, but he started talking about the fertility crisis and about how reducing the cost of rent could actually increase birth rates. And I was like, hey, I guess this seems kind of
Mhm.
convincing, but now that I'm hearing this from an actual expert on the fertility crisis, maybe he was
It's
right about
hugely
that.
important. It's hugely important. I mean, this last year, A massive amount of the work that we did at Institute for Family Studies at the Pronatalism Initiative was focused on housing and fertility. And actually, I'm about to publish another housing and fertility paper like this month. And we worked really closely with like actual property developers and a new housing company that just launched, to really figure out how can we make housing more family friendly and what can we do about it because it is a huge issue. One of the number one things that kids take is space.
Yeah, maybe it's okay. Maybe that's like reason number like 417 about why we need more of both YIMBYism and land value taxing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I guess maybe so. Like you want people like those two things that you wanted in terms of marriage and housing. Are there any specific like values or cultural norms that tend to be predictive of people getting married at a lower age?
Yeah, I mean, religion is definitely one, religiosity, particularly Abrahamic religions, so Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Um, and there's a lot of reasons for this. The best, probably the most plausible reason for why religious people marry younger, the two most plausible reasons is one, sexual legitimation, right? These religions tend to frown on non-marital sex. And while young people might do it anyways, they have to kind of, keep it on the DL. Or they feel bad about it. They might feel guilty about it. And so marriage is a form of sexual legitimation, and so sexual legitimation motivates earlier marriage. But that's actually probably not the main reason, because the reality is in today's world, like the churches are just happy that the young people are still there. They're really not policing their sex lives that aggressively. Um, the bigger reason is that religious communities create just like way better dating pools. Um, the other young people in your religious community tend to be already matched on a lot of basic values. So like you kind of like there's like multiple filters. Like there's a bunch of red flags that just aren't there. Okay, because like the people in your religious community tend to already be aligned on a lot of different things. Like you don't have to talk about like, are you ever going to ask me, can we open up our marriage? No, you're never going to ask me that because we know each other's values. That's never a thing we would ask. What are the conditions under which you would divorce me? Well, we honestly don't. We hardly even need to discuss it because I know what conditions our denomination allows for divorce. Um, you know, uh, do you want kids? Well, we're both in this church. We know we want kids. So dating within religious communities is simplified because there are a lot of possible deal breakers that are pre-solved. And then religious communities tend to support young couples dating. That is, when two young people in the church start dating, people tend to go, "Oh, that's nice." They respond positively. They give social affirmation to it. And sometimes they help materially. Sometimes older couples will invite a younger couple over for mentoring or to talk about it, or the church will provide premarital counseling, or maybe the church even provides like, discounted use of the space for a wedding or something like. You sometimes even get these material transfers where churches like actually support their young people getting married. And so that's basically what's going on. And I should mention that younger marriage in religious communities is not associated with higher divorce rates. The divorce rates in fact, for non-religious people, divorce rates are kind of lowest when people get married, like in like their late 20s, maybe early 30s. But then they rise if you get married after 35. And then they, of course, rise if you get married very young. For religious people, divorce rates are lowest if you marry in your early to mid 20s. Um, so religious people's lowest divorce rates actually occur at relatively young marriages, whereas religious people who wait longer to get married have higher divorce rates. There could be some negative selection there, but for a variety of reasons, I think there is some causal component here, which is just that religious people can sort into high quality matches faster because of the dating pools they run in.
Do you think that more like young people, more Gen Zers should become religious as a way to increase marriage rates and by proxy increase fertility rates?
I think becoming religious look, I'm not opposed to conversion for romance. I converted to my current denomination because my wife was a member of it originally. Um, So I'm not opposed to that. I would say actually believing it is though very important. The only reason that religious dating, quote unquote, works is because all the parties actually believe it, or they're willing to go to their grave pretending like they believe it. Okay, so like showing up at church hoping you can date a girl whose values you don't really share won't really work. So all in favor of conversion. I was a missionary for several years, but like clandestine fake conversion, nah.
Maybe we're at a standstill right now because you talk about how you care so much about increasing birth rates, and then the way to cause that is by increasing marriage rates, especially among young people. And the way to cause that is to become more religious. But now you're saying that you don't want people to become religious just to date or just to
Uh,
like fake it. So like what is the actual causal mechanism to encourage people to become married at younger rates then?
right. So I should clarify there. My argument isn't that people shouldn't become religious. I'm all in favor of people becoming religious. I'm a very religious guy. I'd love everybody to be very religious. It's that they would have to actually become more religious, not just sort of pretend to be for the sake of dating. Right? That's the distinction I make. Not that people shouldn't. Yeah, I'm all in favor of Gen Z attempting to become more religious as a possible strategy, and in doing so, in the full knowledge that they hope this will help them marry. Yeah, like I think that's totally reasonable. Um, but I was just emphasizing that religious dating markets work because the people in question actually believe the things.
Yeah, but is there like any solution for how to increase marriage rates among like
Yeah,
younger
other than
people
religion.
that who don't believe
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the,
yeah.
like God? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think more in-person socializing. I think that's another big bottleneck. Everything is online. There's some people who are just really mean online. These people are huge jerks. I would never be mean to anyone online,
Yeah,
but
of course not. We have absolutely no evidence to suggest that you would be mean to anyone online.
so no, but like online, it is a meaner space. It just is. But also it's a worse space for figuring out who you're really compatible with. It just is. Young people, you need to have stronger norms of in-person socializing, of actually meet up, get offline, go meet up with each other. I think that's really important for healthy, successful relationships. And I think that requires a norm of putting the phone down, right? Having a day where you just don't use your phone. You and your friends just agree to meet up somewhere. Um, and none of you bring your phones. Just leave them at home. Uh, Go hiking in the woods, go camping. Um, I think those kinds of norms are actually quite important.
Yeah, and I do believe that like a lot of the rise in gender polarization since the late 2000s or even early 2010s, a lot of the rise in that and a lot of the decrease in general societal trust, both in everyone but like including
Yeah.
if not especially Gen Z, is causally related to smartphones and a lot of the norms that we have nowadays that make it harder for people to talk to strangers, like that, like even some of the more overly burdensome norms that happen in dating for both men and women. I think a lot of that is causally related to the decline in social trust. And that's part of the like it's a negative feedback loop that encourages people to stay in and go on their phones where they see people like you being mean to everyone, which ends up exacerbating the problem.
I am the problem. Yeah. No, no, I agree with you. I think that online polarization and social media and smartphones and all that is a key part of what's going on um with general polarization in particular, and then also unwillingness to socialize in the real world, right? If you think everyone is like that, if you think Lyman in real life is the way he is online, you might not want to hang out with him.
Yeah, and like it plays a role in people's like subtle body language and subtle cues that make it almost gives you the impression that people in real life are a lot less friendly and that it is wrong to stir the pot to try to like stir up a chat with them. And
Yeah.
as a result, like the the range of acceptable behavior in public when you're trying to be friendly to people has decreased as a result, and I think that that's been
Mhm.
bad. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. All right, final question. What are like you've talked a little bit about how sometimes you've noticed that like you've seen like baby pictures where you thought, "Oh, maybe I played like even like a small not insignificant role in making this happen. What have been some of the proudest stories about what you've been able to accomplish during your time trying to increase fertility rates?
Mm, um, I can say with some confidence that I had a significant hand um, in getting the child tax credit expanded as much as it was in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and the at least the tiny expansion we did get in the uh, One Big Beautiful Bill this year in the U.S. So there are tens of millions of families receiving, a couple hundred extra bucks a year in child tax credits, in some small part because of a role I played pushing the administration and Congress to take seriously the importance of supporting families more. A million people worked on that. It wasn't just me. These are big team efforts, but I can say with confidence that I did have a role to play in that, did help move the needle somewhat. And I'm really proud of that. And I think we're going to do some more this year where there's some policies that I'm hoping may be implemented that'll help a lot of families with a lot of different costs. Anytime I'm able to do something that in some way maybe nudges the way a law gets written, it's enormously satisfying because that is scale, right? That's a place where the belief, the work turns into millions of families getting real benefits, being able to buy things for their kids that they wouldn't have otherwise. A parent um, who can just say yes to their kid for something when their kid asks for it instead of saying no. Um, it's if it makes more babies, great. And financial transfers do slightly increase fertility rates, so I'm all in favor of that. But aside from making more babies, I love knowing that there are families out there where the parents can just give more good things to their kids because in some small part, I screamed at a congressman in a conference room somewhere.
Lyman Stone, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, make sure to follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that you get your podcasts from. Until next time, goodbye.